And if you have highlighters, this is probably a good one to have them. Because I will do a lot of it. A lot of highlighting here. Okay. And I told you, if you came across word problems in the homework, after today, you'll have a much better sense as to what needs to happen. The textbook is, I'm recording this and I apologize to whoever made the textbook. It isn't the greatest. So a lot of the work will be on this workbook. What did I really do is I took a lot of the word problems in the text and revamped it and brought it in here. And it's very grade 12 applied friendly. Okay, I would actually encourage you to keep that for grade 12 applied if you need a review. When sketching the graph of a quadratic function within a context, right? So now we're talking contextual or within a context. There's a text around it. There's a word problem around it. Things mean something, right? You must label the x and y axis with words and units. Very important. You can't just put that down time. It has to be time in what? Years, seconds, minutes. Whatever the problem tells you, you're going to make sure you add that to your axes. And I emphasize that if you don't, you will lose marks. Okay? Start just like before by finding the vertex and all the intercepts. This will give you a good idea of what scale to use and when you're asked to graph. Okay? Most of the time, variables will need to be positive. Okay? Most of the time, variables are positive. So the majority of the graphs, right? Majority of graphs will be limited to quadrant 1. Because time has to be positive, right? Height is a very common variable. We're staying above ground. Obviously, there will be cases where like a bird dives into the water and goes under zero. We have negative height, and you will see that will come your way in a bit. Okay, so let's say, for example, you're given an equation, right? And in the word problem, it will tell you what the variable represents. H of t, height in terms of time, represents the height in feet, right? It tells you height and feet, and t represents time in seconds. Right away, I'm not gonna trick you here. This is your x-axis. The variables on the right-hand side go on your x-axis, and this is your y-axis, right? So y-axis and t, right, goes to the x-axis. I'm not going to trick you there. You're guaranteed that will be the case. Okay, so immediately you're not going to call this x and y from now on. If it's a word problem, you're going to call this time, and we're told it's time in seconds. Okay, and this is height, and it's height in feet, right? So you put the units in brackets. Even if it's money, like profit, you still have to put a dollar sign next to it. Okay? Right, here we go. Just make sure I get this right. So this, what do we call this? We have been calling this the y-intercept, correct? And we've been calling this the x-intercept. And we've been calling this the vertex. Correct? You should recognize those points. Like, yeah, I know x-intercept, y-intercept, vertex. What's missing here? If you were to graph this on your calculator, don't copy this part. I just want you to see it. Your calculator doesn't know that this is a word problem, right? So your calculator is always going to graph the whole thing. It doesn't know, right? So you need to know this is now a word problem, and this is not going to be the case. So you know that x-intercept, that would be somewhere over here on your calculator. right now it's a word problem, it will be omitted. We will not worry about it. Do not find this x-intercept because time is going to be negative here, right? So we kind of are restricted within the first quadrant here. So in general, when it's a height question, okay, the y-intercept is the initial height. The y-intercept tells you what height above the ground, in this particular case, are you at time 0. Okay, so the coordinate would be 0 height, whatever that height is. Okay. Can I just say that every point is time and height, correct? Every single point on this parabola, you should know that the x value represents your time and the height associated with that time after you launch it. So the vertex here is still time height, but this is actually, it's going to give you the max height. Gives the max height after x seconds. Okay, so that vertex now will give you actually the maximum height that this particular object gets to. The x-intercept, can we turn off that music? Is that you, Jalen, or someone? Somebody listening to music? I hear like the beats in the background. The time the object remains airborne. Okay? The time the object remains airborne is found right here. So if the question says how long does the object stay in the air, on the air, or how long does it take it for this object to hit the ground, let's put that on there. It hits the ground. Okay, so the x-intercept will tell us, will answer that question. Like how long is it airborne? How long does it hit until it hits the ground? How long until this object, like let's say you're on a cliff and you throw a rock in the air, how long until that hits the water? Same thing, right? So that's kind of how I want you to re-envision what we've been doing to this now, okay? Most of the time. Okay, so the domain and range changes. In general, guys, in general, for the domain, let me just move this down a bit. When you're doing set notation, it will be like this. In this case, time will be greater than 0, but less than or equal to what we call in this case the x-intercept. Right? So time is constrained between 0 and the action stops when you hit the ground in this case. So that is your domain, acceptable x values. You want to write that down? Acceptable x values. That's what the domain is. Okay, you should remember this from IAPR. Okay, and then interval notation, you would simply say, hey, this object, time goes from 0 to whatever the x-intercept is. Okay. The range is acceptable y values. So the range goes from squiggly brackets, right? In this particular case, right, the lowest height gets to a 0. By the way, h or h of t both would be acceptable. You don't have to do h of t, but whatever is on the, whatever variable is there, watch here, Whatever variable is there, that's what you put in here. Okay. And so what's going to be, what's the highest point this thing gets to? It's the y value of the vertex. And I'm shortening it or else I'll be in trouble here. So it goes from 0 to the highest point, which is determined by the y value of the vertex. Okay. And here you go from 0 to y value of vertex, which is the max, right? In this case, it's the max. I must say this. Under set notation, use given variables. Use given variables. You can handle that, right? I'm shortening variables. Variables. And then I want to make a little, I put a little star here, under right here. The lowest value, okay, may be negative. You may have a negative height. It's called depth, right? Like underground. So this 0 is pending context. Yeah, go ahead. I also want to say this, guys. I did this to help you out, to give you a start, this part. But the scenario will change, I promise you that. So you got to watch out for the examples that are to come, okay? And you got to try a few and just think about what is happening in this scenario. And so domain and range is very important to understand. So I'll take a little bit of time to do that right now. So let's go to page 14 here. If you have two different color highlighters, it's going to come in really handy for this particular page. So here are some variations of what I just did. Scenarios. These are, you got to think of, watch this, axes indicate context. Okay? You should, I was like, oh, this is not just x and y, this is length and area. We have time and height, right? We've got time and height in meters, right? Height and feet. We've got different scenarios here. And so how would we do this? Okay, so let's do the domain first. We'll do domain and range for both of them. For the graph and both ways, okay? So I'm going to use green for range and pink for domain. That's just me, but whatever you have, that works. So if we go for domain, right, remember domain is your acceptable x values. So you start with the graph and you're like, okay, all along here I can see the graph until there. I can't go past that, right? That's my domain. And the range is all the acceptable y values, right? So if you look at the graph, it goes from here all the way to there, it stops there. And that is the range. So the domain, in this case, if you use set notation, you're going from 0, right? This is assumed, like if you're starting right at the origin, you know that that's 0, 0. Okay? So the domain goes from 0 all the way. What variable would I use in this case? I will use, I'm assuming it's going to be L for length, lowercase. You can go uppercase, it's up to you. And it has to be less than, so it goes from 0 all the way to, what's the greatest x value there? 450. Okay? So that would be the acceptable x values in this case. You can also write it like this. This goes from 0 to 450. I actually prefer interval notation when we do word problems. And that's my go-to. Okay? because you don't have to worry about the variable. You just say, hey, the x values go from 0 to 450. For the range, you're also going like the lowest value for the y. In this particular case is 0. You look at the other side, it's 0, right? And I'm going to use A, capital A for area. So for area, I go as low as 0 and as high as, which of these two numbers would I pick? It's the y values I'm interested in, correct? So it's 5,000 is the highest y value acceptable here. So I don't know if you want to do this. It goes from 0 to 5,000, right? To make it very obvious here. And this goes from 0 here all the way to 450. Okay, 0 to 450. Make sense? Maybe not quite yet, but we'll practice this. This goes from 0 to 5,000, right, for the y value. So this is set notation, this is interval notation. Okay. Now, these three down here, I want you to try that for homework. I'm looking at my time. It's going to be, we're not going to have enough time to continue, but I got it started. I got the ball rolling. So homework, do the rest of here, right? Domain and range. I want you to do it in both ways. Okay. Use a pencil. Maybe don't highlight yet because I will go over it, but you need to give this a try. And that's all the homework, guys. I think you can handle that, right? Or do you want more? No? Okay. That's what I figured.